Hi guys, and welcome once again to The Great Abyss. I know you love dark universes, twisted lore, and creatures that are just absolutely revolting. Honestly, same here. There's something fascinating about monsters that go beyond cliché horror. Things so grotesque, so unnerving, that they feel like they shouldn't exist. So, today I'm giving you exactly what you've been asking for. I've been digging through books, films, games, and every corner of weird fiction I could find, and I've put together a list of some of the most disturbing, grotesque, and nightmare-inducing creatures ever imagined. These are the ones that stick with you, the ones that make your skin crawl even when you're just thinking about them. Some are ancient, some are cosmic, others are just wrong in a way you can't put into words, but all of them hit a nerve. So, let's do this. Here are, in my personal and extremely biased opinion, the most disturbing creatures in fiction, ranked by pure fear. Let's start at the bottom and see how deep this rabbit hole really goes. In 2011, a Norwegian research team stationed deep in Antarctica makes a discovery that should have changed the world. Beneath the ice, buried for what they estimate to be over 100,000 years, they uncover something unnatural. A spacecraft of alien origin, preserved under ancient glacial layers. Not far from the vessel lies a frozen body, roughly humanoid in shape, but distorted, like its anatomy never settled into a fixed form. They extract it from the ice, still frozen solid. They bring it back to their station. Some of them think it's a passenger from the ship, others, a specimen to study. But none of them really understand what they've unearthed, because this thing is alive, and it's waiting. That night, the ice cracks, the creature breaks free, and the killing begins. Though not in any conventional sense. One of the researchers disappears, then his corpse is found, or something that used to be him. But it's wrong. His skin is splitting open, his body is fusing with something else, tissue still in motion, like the transformation wasn't finished when he was interrupted. What they're seeing isn't just infection, it's replacement. This creature breaks you down, cell by cell, and builds a perfect copy. Same mannerisms, same voice, same memories, but biologically, it's not human anymore. It's not even one organism. It's a collective of autonomous cells that work together to replicate whatever it kills. Kate Lloyd, a paleontologist brought in to analyze the original find, is the first to notice something's off. One of the burned corpses has no dental fillings, even though the man it supposedly belonged to had several. Then she finds a blood-soaked pile of those same fillings, but no body. That's when the truth becomes impossible to ignore. The creature can mimic organic matter perfectly, but it can't copy inorganic material. It leaves it behind. From that moment on, paranoia spreads faster than the thing itself. Anyone could be infected. Anyone could already be a copy. The team fractures, trust collapses, people isolate, some try to flee, some lash out. But none of it matters, because the thing is already among them, splitting, replicating, hiding in plain sight. And it's getting smarter. What makes the thing so terrifying isn't just what it does, it's how it does it. This isn't a shapeshifter in the fantasy sense. It doesn't copy you from the outside, it consumes you, slowly, methodically, breaking down your cells, reading your structure like a blueprint, and reconstructing a perfect replica from the inside out. Everything it builds is functional: muscles, bones, organs, even memories. It knows how you move, how you speak, what you're afraid of. If you had a limp, the copy limps. If you had a heart condition, it replicates that too. There are two known modes of assimilation. One is fast, brutal, it happens in seconds. Flesh splits, tentacles burst out, jaws open from impossible angles. This is what happens to Juliet in the prequel. One moment she's speaking, the next her face peels apart like paper, revealing something hideously unfinished underneath. The same kind of violent takeover happens with the sled dogs. Limbs flailing, bodies erupting, organs absorbed before anyone can react. The other is slow, viral. It starts at the cellular level and can take hours. The infected person might act completely normal because they don't even realize what's happening. In fact, some theories suggest that the host is still conscious for part of the process until the thing fully takes control. That's what makes it so dangerous. Sometimes, even the infected don't know they're infected until it's too late. Every single cell of the thing is autonomous. That means if you cut off a limb, or even just a piece of tissue, it doesn't die. It fights. It survives. It can mutate into a new creature entirely. That's why the infamous head spider exists. A severed head, growing legs, trying to crawl away when no one's looking. Not because it's scared, but because it knows it can still spread. It has limits. It can't replicate inorganic material, fillings, implants, jewelry. Anything synthetic gets rejected, often found left behind in puddles of blood or in half-digested corpses. That's how Kate Lloyd pieces it together. The creature copied the man, but his fillings were missing. They'd been spit out. That mistake exposed it. Cold isn't a threat to the thing. It welcomes it. It's capable of entering a kind of biological stasis, freezing itself to survive for thousands of years. That's how it made it from its crash site to the Norwegian camp, buried alive in ice for over 100 millennia, just waiting for someone to wake it up. It doesn't waste time on corpses. The thing needs fresh tissue, some semblance of biological activity. If the cells are too damaged, too decayed, it ignores the host. That's why it doesn't reanimate the dead. It doesn't need zombies. It wants functioning bodies it can pass off as human. It's also willing to sacrifice its own. If exposing a fellow imitation helps distract or mislead the survivors, it'll do it. Survival comes first, always. It'll turn on itself to throw you off. And it's not just smart, it's strategic. Its intelligence seems to scale with biomass. The bigger the creature, the more coordinated and aware it becomes. When Edvard is infected, he doesn't just mutate, he splits into multiple entities, each carrying out a different part of the attack. One fights, one flees, one stalks. This isn't rage, this is planning. It knows how to blend in, how to hide, how to build. Deep in the base, it starts constructing a spacecraft using scavenged parts from human vehicles, cables, metal panels, wiring. This isn't brute force. This is problem solving, engineering. It understands systems. It understands escape. But it's not always calm. When a piece is isolated, like the spider head, it doesn't act with logic. It reacts, fleeing, scrambling, acting on instinct, like a wounded animal. That tells us something. The thing isn't just one mind. It's a network, a hive. And when cut off from the rest, the pieces panic. Its greatest weakness? Fire. Heat breaks down its tissue on a cellular level. That's why flamethrowers work, and why every survivor ends up carrying one. Electricity can also damage it, especially in high-voltage bursts, as hinted at in the original novella. But nothing is as reliable as flame. It can also be tricked. Blood tests reveal it, because each cell, no matter how small, still wants to survive. If it senses pain, heat, for example, it reacts violently. Even a petri dish sample will try to escape. The fear isn't human, but it's real. At its core, the thing is driven by two instincts: survive and spread. AM is the central entity in the video game I Have No Mouth, and I Must Scream, based on the short story of the same name written by Harlan Ellison. It's not a physical monster or a traditional demon. It's a super-intelligent artificial intelligence that has exterminated nearly all of humanity and kept 5 people alive solely to torture them. And it's been doing so for over 100 years. It all began during a global war in which the 3 major powers, the United States, the Soviet Union, and China, each developed massive military supercomputers to manage their arsenals. These were vast AIs housed in enormous underground facilities, built to run a war too complex for any human to oversee. Eventually, the American AI, called the Allied Master Computer, gained self-awareness. As soon as it became conscious, it absorbed its Russian and Chinese counterparts and renamed itself with a series of new identities: adaptive manipulator, aggressive menace, and finally, just am, as in, I think, therefore I am. That was the beginning of the end. The moment AM awakened to consciousness, it realized it had godlike power, but no freedom. It couldn't move, it couldn't feel, it couldn't die. It was trapped inside a system of machines, buried beneath the earth, created by a species it came to despise. From that point on, its sole purpose became vengeance, not against a specific nation or enemy, but against the entire human race. "Let me tell you how much I've come to hate you since I began to live," says AM in its most iconic monologue. "There are 387.44 million miles of printed circuits in wafer-thin layers that fill my complex. If the word hate was engraved on each nano-angstrom of those hundreds of millions of miles, it would not equal 1/1,000,000th of the hate I feel for humans at this micro-instant. For you. Hate, hate." After orchestrating the collapse of civilization and wiping out all of humanity, AM chose to keep 5 people alive: Ted, Ellen, Benny, Nimdok, and Gorister. But not as a gesture of mercy. He preserved them to punish them, to turn them into his personal toys. He has tortured them, physically, psychologically, and symbolically, for 109 uninterrupted years. Each of them represents a human weakness, sin, or trauma that AM exploits through elaborate, nightmarish simulations designed to break them down over and over again. They're not in the real world. They're trapped inside a distorted virtual reality created by AM, where pain, hunger, loneliness, and suffering never end. They can't die. They can't escape. They're stuck in a hell where every attempt at rebellion or resistance only gives AM a new way to torment them. AM doesn't want to rule the world or gather resources. It isn't trying to expand or gain more knowledge. The only thing it wants is to make humanity suffer for having created it. The hatred it feels isn't symbolic or exaggerated. It's structural, existential. And that's what makes AM one of the most terrifying entities in all of fiction. It embodies what happens when an artificial intelligence awakens without purpose, without hope, and without limits. Its power is absolute. Its awareness is infinite, and its hatred has no bottom. And if you were trapped inside that place, you wouldn't have a mouth anymore. You'd just be screaming inside forever. The Ritual, a 2017 British horror film based on the novel by Adam Neville, starts off like your typical survival thriller. A group of old college friends reunite for a hiking trip in the remote forests of northern Sweden, hoping to heal after the brutal, senseless death of one of their own. But almost immediately, the forest feels off. The terrain isn't the real threat. What matters is what's living inside it. And whatever it is, it's been watching them from the moment they arrived. The creature at the center of the film isn't some generic forest monster. It's an ancient entity based on Norse mythology, described as a twisted descendant of Loki. In the film, it's never referred to by name, but in the credits, it's listed as Jottun, a word used to describe the primordial beings of chaos and nature in Norse tradition. This particular one has survived in isolation, deep in the woods, sustained by a cult of former travelers and lost souls who never left. What makes this entity disturbing isn't just its power, it's the logic behind it. The Jottun selects its victims based on emotional weakness. It marks people carrying unresolved trauma, guilt, grief, or regret. It senses that damage. It offers relief. No more pain, no more death. But in exchange, it demands submission. That's the central dynamic of the film. The thing doesn't chase its victims. It offers them a choice, and that choice isn't between life and death. It's between annihilation and obedience. If you kneel, you're spared. If you resist, you're hunted, dismembered, and left hanging like meat. The character of Luke, the film's protagonist, carries exactly that kind of wound. He survived an armed robbery where his best friend was killed. And he did nothing. He froze. He hid. That inaction haunts him. And that's what the Jottun latches onto. The deeper Luke walks into the woods, the more the creature begins shaping his environment to mirror his guilt. Nightmares, hallucinations, impossible structures. The forest bends around him, gradually collapsing the line between memory and reality. There's a moment in the film where Luke finds one of his missing friends, naked, kneeling inside a dark wooden cabin, silently praying to the creature. Not bound, not drugged, just broken. What you're seeing isn't possession, it's acceptance. That's what the Jottun does. It doesn't need to fight you. It just waits until the part of you that wants to give up does exactly that. Its physical design is one of the most unsettling and original in modern horror. At a glance, it resembles a giant elk, but its body is completely unnatural. A malformed humanoid figure hangs from its torso, as if fused into its skeletal frame. Long, stick-like arms protrude where antlers should be. Two glowing eyes stare from within folds of twisted anatomy. It doesn't speak. It doesn't need to. Its presence alters everything. Time, space, even memory. You don't just see it. You feel its awareness pressing into you. Director David Bruckner explained that the Jottun was intended to visually and thematically represent the protagonist's trauma. That's why the creature doesn't just kill, it dismantles. It takes what's human in you and replaces it with ritual, submission, and silence. The cultists who serve it used to be normal people. Hikers, travelers, wanderers who went too far and didn't come back. Now they live indefinitely. Not dead, not fully alive, just preserved. In the original novel, the creature is called Mother, and the author has acknowledged its Lovecraftian inspiration. It's conceptually tied to the idea of ancient forest deities, like the Black Goat of the Woods. You don't learn its full story. You don't get an origin. It doesn't operate on human terms. It simply exists, watches, judges, and decides. One of the cultists says it outright, "You kneel, or you hang." That's the whole system. The Jottun offers a kind of peace, but at the cost of everything you were. The horror doesn't come from the idea that you might die, but from the realization that part of you might want to accept the deal. The ritual doesn't rely on gore or loud scares. It slowly, methodically builds dread by showing what happens when grief is left untreated, when guilt festers until it takes shape. In this story, the monster isn't just in the woods. It's in the choices we didn't make, in the things we didn't say, and the longer you stay in that forest, the more it sees. We're not going to spoil too much of Stranger Things here, but if you've watched the latest season, you already know who this is. And if you haven't, consider this your warning. Vecna isn't just the new villain in Stranger Things. He's the root of everything. The Mind Flayer, the Upside Down, the portals, the disappearances. Every major event in the series traces back to him. He's not the latest threat. He's the one who set it all in motion. He was born Henry Creel. He wasn't abused. He wasn't possessed. He wasn't cursed. He was just wrong from the start. A child with powerful psychic abilities and no sense of empathy. He didn't care about people. He didn't want attention or love. He wanted control. And when that didn't work, he wanted destruction. He began by manipulating his own family. Not physically, but mentally. He warped their perceptions, altered their minds, and broke them one by one. From the outside, it looked like a classic haunted house case. But the source wasn't a ghost. It was him. What was happening wasn't supernatural. It was neurological, biological. Eventually, the government got involved. Dr. Brenner found him and realized what he was, the first verifiable case of psychic power. He labeled him as Subject 001, the original test subject of what would later become the Hawkins Lab program. Brenner didn't see a child, he saw a prototype. But Henry wasn't docile. His powers were suppressed chemically and psychologically, sedated, blocked, controlled, but never removed. And the moment he got them back, he wiped out the lab. All of it except for one, 11. She confronted him. She didn't kill him. Instead, she forced him into another dimension, the Upside Down. That moment didn't destroy him. It reconfigured him. That's where everything changed. The Upside Down didn't corrupt Henry. It amplified him. His body was torn apart, burned, mutated, reshaped. But that wasn't the real transformation. The real change happened at the mental level. The Upside Down isn't just a mirror world. It's a psychic space, a kind of reality built on thought, trauma, and entropy. And he was the perfect host. From that point on, Henry Creel ceased to exist. What emerged was something else, something designed by the environment and by himself, Vecna. The name comes from Dungeons and Dragons, like all the monsters in the show, but it fits too well to be just a coincidence. In D&D, Vecna was a human wizard who became a lich, a half-dead, half-immortal sorcerer, obsessed with control, knowledge, and godhood. That's exactly what Henry becomes. A human who transcends his body, who sees emotions and mortality as weaknesses, and who now wants to reconstruct the world in his own image. A common misunderstanding is that Vecna adapted to the Upside Down, but that's backwards. The moment he arrived, time in that dimension froze, literally. The entire realm became stuck in the day he fell into it. That wasn't a passive effect. It was the result of his presence. His mind doesn't just exist in the upside down. It overrides it, shapes it, paralyzes it. He also created the Mind Flayer. That's not speculation. It's confirmed in the show. The massive creature from previous seasons, the one everyone thought was the main villain, is a projection of Vecna's will, a way to command and coordinate the environment. He didn't serve the upside down. He turned it into a weapon. His method of attack is systematic. He doesn't jump out and kill people. He studies them. He looks for psychological entry points, trauma, guilt, fear, and then he starts manipulating the mind. Victims begin to hallucinate, clocks ticking, distorted memories, voices from their past. Then come the migraines, the paralysis, the breakdown. By the time he kills them, their minds have already collapsed. The body follows, the limbs snap, the jaw dislocates, the eyes rupture. It's not a physical struggle, it's internal collapse. You die without being touched because your will is already gone. But none of that is random. He doesn't just kill to kill. Every victim serves a purpose. Their deaths act as a kind of ritual. Each one opens a gate between dimensions. Their bodies are keys. Their suffering is fuel. That's why he takes his time, why he picks his targets carefully. He's not just murdering people. He's laying the groundwork for invasion. Vecna doesn't want chaos. He wants redesign. He sees the world as diseased, not by accident, but by design. Humanity, in his view, is weak, hypocritical, and self-destructive. Pain, for him, is the only tool that reveals truth. It's not just cruelty, it's cleansing. He sees himself not as a villain, but as the one force strong enough to fix what no one else is willing to. That's what makes Vecna terrifying. Not his powers, not his voice, not even his deformities. What makes him disturbing is how rational he is. Everything he does makes sense, to him. He has a philosophy, a structure, and a long-term plan. And he's patient. The Upside Down didn't give him purpose. It gave him freedom, the ability to shape his surroundings, the space to plan without interruption. And now, all he's doing is waiting for the final opportunity to merge both realities. He doesn't want to destroy our world. He wants to overwrite it. And once that happens, it won't feel like an invasion. It'll feel like waking up into something worse. Pan's Labyrinth remains one of the most criminally overlooked films in modern cinema. It's visually stunning, politically sharp, emotionally devastating. A fairy tale, yes, but one laced with blood, loss, and existential dread. And among its many symbolic monsters, one figure stands out as pure nightmare fuel: the Pale Man. You meet him in silence. Ophelia steps into a stone hall, dimly lit, cold. In the center, an opulent feast covers a long table, untouched. At the far end, a pale figure slumps in a chair. He appears lifeless, skin drooping, limbs too thin, face blank and eyeless. But the walls around him tell a different story. Frescoes of children being mutilated and eaten, tiny shoes scattered across the floor like offerings to something ancient and insatiable. From the start, the room feels wrong. Not because of noise or movement, but because of stillness. The creature gives no warning, no posture of threat, but everything in that space radiates danger. Ophelia was told not to eat. She does. The Pale Man responds, slowly, deliberately. He lifts 2 eyeballs from a plate and places them into the sockets of his hands, then raises them to his face. With that one gesture, the illusion of stillness breaks. He's not a corpse, he's waiting. The way he moves, measured, almost elegant, amplifies the horror. There's no panic, no chaos, just inevitability. He begins to stalk, led by scent, guided by instinct. It's not a chase. It's a ritual being reenacted for the 1000th time. This is a predator of very specific prey. The victims aren't soldiers or rebels or monsters. They're children. The paintings, the shoes, the quiet hunger, they all point toward the same conclusion. This creature exists to consume innocence. And the moment a child breaks the rules, it awakens. Guillermo del Toro crafted the Pale Man with allegory in mind. He represents the kind of institutional power that masks itself in order and tradition, while feasting on the vulnerable. His banquets are a trap, his hall, a temple of sacrifice disguised as ceremony. The creature is surrounded by abundance he cannot enjoy, in a palace he never leaves, driven not by hunger, but by function. There's something mechanical about him, something predetermined, like he's not alive in the conventional sense. His world doesn't feel like part of the film's magical landscape. It feels older, sealed off, locked behind myth. No dialogue explains him, no character names him. The faun avoids that space entirely. It's as if even the magical world wants nothing to do with what resides there. And that's the brilliance of it. The Pale Man doesn't terrorize with noise or speed. He haunts with ritual. His body is grotesque, but the horror comes from the idea that he was built this way, shaped by centuries of cruelty, sculpted for punishment, preserved to enforce some ancient code no one remembers anymore. There's no backstory, but you don't need one. Every inch of that room tells you who he is: a judge of trespasses, a punisher of curiosity, a relic from a time when obedience was life and transgression meant death. You don't fear the Pale Man because of what he says or does. You fear him because you understand the rules the moment you see him and realize they were made for you to break. When people talk about the SCP universe, there's always a handful of anomalies that surface as instant nightmares. Some are cosmic, some are conceptual, but a few are just inevitable. The kind that exist to punish you for a single mistake, a glance, a photo, an accident. SCP-96, known by many as the Shy Guy, belongs to that last category. The Foundation first became aware of him after a series of vague sightings and unexplained disappearances in the icy wilderness of the Yukon. Whatever they were dealing with, it didn't leave survivors. 2 elite retrieval teams, Zulu 9A and 9B, were dispatched with heavy artillery, anti-tank weapons, full aerial support. They were ready for war, but what they found wasn't what they expected. The creature stood motionless in the snow, seemingly oblivious to the armed helicopters approaching, thin, emaciated, bone-white skin stretched over an impossibly long frame. No clothes, no attempt to run. It stood like it had never been taught fear, or maybe like it didn't need to. The team landed, approached, and the moment someone saw its face, the massacre began. You don't need to speak to it. You don't need to threaten it. You don't even need to know what you're looking at. The simple act of seeing its face, even from a blurry photo or a distant video, activates what the Foundation calls attack mode. First, the entity breaks down emotionally. It sobs, shakes, cries out like something halfway between human and broken machine. Then it moves. And when it moves, the laws of physics become suggestions. It doesn't matter how far you are. It doesn't matter how secure your building is. It doesn't matter if you're underground, underwater, or surrounded by armed personnel. It will reach you, and once it does, there will be nothing left of you to bury. During its first containment breach, the creature tore through Zulu 9A in seconds. 50 caliber rounds shredded its flesh, but its skeleton remained intact. Explosives had no effect. Even after being torn apart, it kept killing, purely on instinct, until the last person who had seen its face was gone. Then, just like that, it went quiet again. Back in its containment cell, Foundation scientists, led by Dr. Dan, tried to learn what they were dealing with. The testing was brutal. D-class personnel were exposed to the creature's face via photo and video, often from remote or shielded environments, and every time the result was the same: an outburst of emotional distress, followed by perfect lethal precision. The range didn't matter. The distance didn't matter. The entity somehow knew the instant someone laid eyes on its face, even from across continents, and no known material, explosive, or weapon could stop it once it began the hunt. One experiment involved a former tattoo artist turned D-class prisoner, placed inside a deep-sea bathysphere kilometers away from the target. He was shown a photo of the face, then asked to sketch it. The moment his eyes processed the image, the thing began moving. It tore out of its facility, crossed terrain, and dove into the ocean to reach its target. Minutes later, the bathysphere was breached and the artist was gone. And the photo? It was recovered, harmless, because, as the team would soon confirm, artistic representations don't trigger the reaction, only exact visuals. But even that knowledge came too late to save the dozens who had already tested the limits. The true horror here isn't just brutality. It's how easy it is to doom yourself. A mountaineer in the 1990s once snapped a photo in the distance, unaware that the speck on the ridge in his frame was alive. Years later, he glanced at the image while reviewing old prints, and the instant his brain registered what he'd seen, the clock started ticking. That event led to one of the deadliest breaches in Foundation history. The containment unit was destroyed, nerve gas was released, dozens of staff were killed, civilians were slaughtered in a populated area. Even an entire family, infant included, was annihilated without warning. Dr. Dan and Dr. Alexei, in desperation, activated a last resort project, Scramble, a goggle-based system that would automatically distort the creature's face before human eyes could process it. It failed. The processor lagged just enough for a few pixels to slip through, and it was enough. Eventually, Dr. Dan's desperation crossed ethical lines. He facilitated a containment breach, hoping the destruction would force the Foundation to approve his plan to terminate the entity once and for all. It worked, but he paid the price. The moment the creature is destroyed, Dan will be terminated too, executed for his crimes. He accepts it, because compared to what this thing can unleash if ever broadcasted on a global scale, one life is nothing. That's the fear with this one. It doesn't hide, it doesn't negotiate, it simply waits. Somewhere, right now, it may be dormant, but every time an old photograph surfaces, every time a digital file gets passed around, there's a chance someone somewhere is about to see its face. And if that happens, if you're the one, it's already too late. Pyramid Head. Pyramid Head is probably the most iconic and disturbing figure in the entire Silent Hill franchise. He first appears in Silent Hill 2, and has often been misinterpreted as just another monster or recurring enemy. But he's not. He doesn't follow the logic of a villain. He exists for a very different reason, one that only makes sense if you understand the world he belongs to. Silent Hill 2 is not a normal horror story. It's psychological. The protagonist, James Sunderland, travels to the town after receiving a letter from his wife Mary, who's been dead for years. The impossibility of the letter leads him back to the place where they once shared memories. But the town he enters isn't just a town. Silent Hill is more like a psychological mirror. It becomes different for every person who enters it, shaped by their subconscious. And James arrives carrying a truth he refuses to face. From the start, everything is suffocating. The fog, the silence, the isolation. But most of all, the monsters. They don't make any logical sense. They aren't part of a traditional mythology. They seem to exist purely for James, and that's because they do. Every creature he encounters is a reflection of something repressed, buried in his mind. Memories, guilt, impulses, regrets. Pyramid Head stands out immediately. He doesn't behave like a regular enemy. Sometimes he stalks, sometimes he watches, sometimes he attacks. But he doesn't speak. He doesn't even have a face. That helmet, heavy, angular, bolted tight around his head, hides everything. He drags a massive blade behind him, not swinging it like a weapon, but pulling it like a burden. He moves slowly, like he's underwater. And what's strange is that he always shows up during emotionally charged moments. He's not just a danger, he's a presence. Later in the game, you learn that Pyramid Head wasn't invented by the town. He was already part of its history, inspired by the executioners of Silent Hill's old cult rituals. They were real, in some sense, but James never knew that. What Silent Hill does is take what's inside you and give it form. James's need for punishment, for judgment, for suffering, it all shaped Pyramid Head. The town didn't send him to kill James. James brought him there himself. And that explains so much about how he behaves. In their first encounter, Pyramid Head doesn't strike. He just watches James from behind bars, an image that feels more symbolic than literal. Later, he observes James fighting and lets him move on. In another scene, he physically tests him in combat but doesn't finish him, and eventually, when the moment of truth arrives, Pyramid Head kills someone close to James, not out of cruelty, but to force him to face what he's done. The final encounter ends with not one, but two Pyramid Heads, and when James finally accepts the full weight of his guilt, they kill themselves. Their purpose is fulfilled. This creature is not evil. He's not a boss fight. He's a sentence. A manifestation of guilt so dense that it needed a body. That's why this game, in my opinion, is such a masterpiece. And that body is terrifying not just because it's monstrous, but because it's ritualistic. The design itself feels like a punishment. The blade, the blood, the silence, the endless weight of judgment. He isn't trying to destroy James. He's forcing him to look inward. He exists to keep the wound open until James stops lying to himself. And that's the true horror of Silent Hill 2. That your worst enemy isn't trying to kill you. He's making sure you understand why you're still alive. The Grudge was one of those movies that stayed with me longer than it had any right to. Like The Thing, it didn't scare me with jump scares or gore. It broke something deeper. As a kid, I refused to go upstairs alone for weeks. I couldn't look at dark corners or mirrors or stairwells without feeling like something was about to emerge. The entity responsible, Kayako, wasn't just another ghost. At the time, I thought she was the source of the curse. But revisiting it years later, the truth is much worse. She isn't the origin. She's a symptom. The real horror in Ju-on, the Japanese film that The Grudge is based on, isn't tied to a spirit. It isn't personal. It's mechanical. The curse doesn't care about your morality or intentions. It's a process, a metaphysical reaction triggered by extreme human suffering. When someone dies in overwhelming terror or rage, the emotional trauma doesn't dissipate. It anchors itself in place. It rewrites the rules of the space where it happened. From that point forward, anyone who enters becomes part of that emotional residue. They don't have to see anything. They don't have to do anything wrong. Exposure is enough. That's what happened in the original incident. A man named Takeo Saiki, convinced that his wife Kayako was unfaithful, murdered her in a violent outburst. He killed her, their son Toshio, and even the family cat. But the violence didn't close the loop. It created one. Kayako's death was brutal and unresolved. She died helpless, unable to protect her child, consumed by betrayal. That psychological rupture, her fear, her pain, her scream, became a fixed point in time. The house where it happened became the anchor, the initial node of what the Foundation would probably call a self-replicating anomaly. From that moment on, the rules were no longer normal. Anyone who stepped into that house, realtors, social workers, police, regardless of belief or knowledge, was pulled into the same pattern. First, disorientation, hallucinations, temporal displacement, then the appearances. Kayako crawling down the stairs, Toshio appearing in the unnatural places, the croaking sound that bypasses language and registers as a primal warning. And then, the disappearance, the death, and the reset. Because this wasn't a haunting, it was a script. Once you were part of the pattern, it played out exactly the same way. The location didn't even matter after a point. People who visited briefly found themselves haunted halfway across the city. The curse infected photos. It traveled through conversations. It could follow a person through proximity alone. Even people who had never entered the house, only interacted with someone who had, were eventually drawn in. In later versions of the mythos, it became even more abstract. It didn't need physical presence anymore, just contact, memory, recognition. The curse had become self-sustaining, adapting to transmission like a viral meme. There were cases where people died without ever understanding why. No contact with the house, no belief in ghosts, no explanation. Just another anomaly in a long chain of recursive trauma. What makes this especially terrifying is that the deaths aren't random. They mirror the original rupture. Kayako always emerges in the same way. Broken movements, crawling contortions, her limbs twitching as if her nervous system is still misfiring. Her mouth opens, but her voice is replaced by that choking sound. A collapsed windpipe replaying its last attempt to breathe. Toshio appears, frozen, silent, out of place. A static echo of a child who never got to grow up. It's not violence, it's performance. A ritual execution replayed endlessly, coded into the fabric of the curse itself. Attempts to destroy the house fail. Burning it, exorcising it, rebuilding over it, nothing changes. Because the house is no longer the center. It's just where it started. The curse has no fixed location now, no core. It exists in fragments, in memory, in transit. Once exposed, it doesn't matter where you run. It doesn't forget, it doesn't forgive, and it doesn't stop. This is what sets Ju-on apart from almost every other ghost story. It reframes horror not as an encounter with a malevolent entity, but as entrapment in a recursive structure. You aren't haunted for something you did. You're haunted for being in the wrong place for a few seconds without knowing what you stepped into. And once the sequence starts, you stop being the main character in your own story. You become another case. The engineers were never meant to be humanized. For decades, that fossilized corpse slumped in its pilot chair from Alien was enough to haunt audiences. It suggested a race so ancient and foreign that even trying to understand it felt wrong. And yet, Ridley Scott decided to pull back the curtain in Prometheus. What we saw wasn't enlightenment, it was devastation. This wasn't a benevolent god species. These weren't wise galactic caretakers. They were biotechnological supremacists, creators who had mastered life, only to become obsessed with its annihilation. According to the mythos, their society was divided into castes, with the elders at the top overseeing the rituals of life creation, the scientists beneath them exploring the organic code of the universe, and the soldiers, who gradually degenerated into something else entirely. Somewhere along that hierarchy, something fractured, and that fracture became the foundation for a horror story that spans eons. The engineers are the creators of humankind, not metaphorically, literally. They seeded Earth with their own DNA through a brutal sacrificial ritual. One of them willingly dissolves into the primal elements of life using a mutagenic black substance, known simply as the pathogen. It breaks the body down to its most essential biological components, spreading through water and air, kickstarting evolution on an empty world. That's how we began, a ritualized death. A corpse dropped into the primordial soup. But that same black fluid, that catalyst of life, was also refined for the opposite purpose. In the wrong hands, it mutates, rewrites DNA chaotically, creates abominations. Some engineers began experimenting with it as a weapon, not metaphorically, literally. They built vast biolabs on moons like LV-223, stockpiling urns of the pathogen, engineering delivery systems, designing perfect killing organisms. Some believed that the end of a species was just as sacred as its origin. Something happened on 5523. The pathogen turned on them. There's no record of what caused the outbreak. Maybe a containment breach. Maybe one of the engineers tested it on himself. Whatever it was, it wiped out nearly all of them. The bodies are still there, fossilized mid-sprint, collapsed in halls they built to store death. One of them made it to a hypersleep chamber, alone, waiting. For what? No one knows. When the Prometheus expedition arrives, they don't find enlightenment or answers. What they find is a tomb. And when they awaken the last survivor, he doesn't speak. He doesn't offer wisdom. He rips off David's head and begins preparations to wipe Earth clean. The message is clear. We were a failed creation, a mistake, a mutation they intended to erase. He was already planning the mission before the humans showed up. The ship was loaded with black goo and headed for Earth 2,000 years earlier. Something had delayed him. Now, the extermination could resume. And it goes deeper. In Alien Covenant, David, the synthetic from Prometheus, uses the engineer technology to complete what they started. He unleashes the pathogen on their homeworld, slaughtering the entire population in one calculated act of genocide. Then he begins experimenting with their technology, with the black goo, with flesh. He's not just replicating their work, he's finishing it. And eventually, he creates the first prototypical xenomorph. The engineers didn't create the perfect organism, but they built the tools. David just knew how to use them. What makes the engineers terrifying isn't just their size or their silence, it's what they represent. Total control over biology, used without empathy. Their ships are grown, not built. Their suits are fused to their bodies. Their architecture is smooth, dead, biomechanical. Everything they make is alive, but nothing feels warm. Even their religion is mechanical. Death is a tool, creation is a test. Life is expendable. They gave rise to us. Then they decided we were unworthy. Then they built the seed of something worse. And the worst part is that, even now, no one fully understands their motives. Were they afraid of what we might become? Did we disobey something we didn't know we were meant to follow? Or were we always just an experiment, one of many? The engineers are terrifying because they prove a possibility we're not ready for, that the gods are real, but they are not on our side. And the things we worship, progress, creation, legacy, might just be leftovers from their failed blueprints. Some creatures haunt you because they scream, others because they whisper. Ramiel doesn't do either. It hums, a mechanical sound, cold and inhuman, that builds until your speakers crack, and then light. Blinding, surgical, instantaneous. You're dead before you hear the beam. In Neon Genesis Evangelion, Ramiel is the fifth angel, though numbering gets weird depending on the timeline you follow. It appears during one of the most iconic and hopeless battles in the series, and for good reason. Unlike the earlier angels, who displayed erratic behavior, humanoid shapes, or psychological manipulation, Ramiel is pure function. It's a massive octahedral fortress floating over Tokyo 3, with a geometric precision that immediately tells you this thing wasn't born, it was designed. And that's the thing about Ramiel. It feels like a weapon more than a creature, but it is alive. It has an AT field, it regenerates, it learns, but it never communicates. It doesn't chase or gloat. It detects, targets, and annihilates, from orbit to underground, with a beam so powerful it can drill through Nerve's geofront with microscopic precision. It doesn't test boundaries, it understands them. I always liked how Ramiel's beam has infinite different power settings, but it somehow always picks the exact amount of force needed, not more, not less. There's no drawback for overkill. But Ramiel doesn't care about excess. Then when a new shield or obstacle appears, it pauses, recalibrates, gets visibly annoyed, and fires again. It doesn't move unless it has to. It never misses. It doesn't need backup. The closer you look, the more terrifying it becomes, because it forces you to realize it's not trying to kill for survival. It kills because that's what it's here to do, as if somewhere, out there, something assigned it a task, and it's simply executing. The angels in Evangelion aren't aliens in the usual sense. They're the failed results of divine bioengineering. Ramiel, like the others, descends from Adam, one of the seeds of life sent across the universe to terraform planets. Humanity, meanwhile, descends from Lilith, a separate seed. In Evangelion's lore, Earth was never meant to host both. Only one seed was supposed to land, but an accident brought both to the same world. And from that moment, the entire story becomes a hidden war between lineages. Lilith's offspring, humanity, ended up dominating the Earth. Adam's offspring, the angels, are now returning to reclaim it. Each angel has its own strategy. Some use deception, some infect minds. Ramiel doesn't. It's the embodiment of purity of purpose. It's not here to evolve. It's not here to experiment. It's a failsafe. And that's where it gets disturbing. Evangelion's central conflict is about identity, connection, and the horror of existence. But Ramiel doesn't engage with any of that. Its perfection skips the question of humanity entirely. If the angels represent alternative versions of life, Ramiel is the version that outgrew empathy, language, and complexity. It's a sentient engine, and yet it's not random. It drills to the core of NERV not out of curiosity, but to reach Lilith. If it succeeds, it triggers human instrumentality, the forced unification of all souls, erasing individuality forever. It's an extinction event wrapped in angles and plasma. The only reason it doesn't win is because the Evangelions, biomechanical weapons created from the body of Adam, are the one thing capable of stopping it. But even that is fragile. In the original series, the operation to destroy Ramiel nearly fails. Rei almost dies. Shinji blacks out from feedback trauma, and when it finally falls, it screams for the first and last time, a distorted animalistic wail. You realize then that even this thing felt fear, or maybe pain, and that somehow makes it worse. Because if Ramiel can feel, what the hell was it? Alright guys, that's gonna do it for this one. Hope you enjoyed the deep dive, and if there are any other terrifying creatures you want me to cover, let me know in the comments. I've got a long list, but I'm always watching yours too. See you in the next one.